Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast. It's an update and news about the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA, together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at aicpa-cima.com and also at enroll.cgma.com. As usual, you're listening to myself, Kevin Gormley, and today I'm joined by Hugh Martin, who's been on the podcast before, and Hugh's here to talk about the strategic case study that's upcoming in our November exam setting. Good afternoon, Hugh.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Obviously, we are here to talk about the case study, but could you tell me a little bit about what you do in your business?
Yeah, sure. So basically, the business that I own is called Procountancy. It's an official CIMA tuition provider. And basically what we do is we help students with their strategic case study exam. So at the moment, we basically just offer SCS materials. We've written an end-to-end textbook for the SCS. So if you're someone who has, let's say, never sat any CIMA exam before, we have a book that basically covers everything that you need to know for the SCS. And there's 20 questions as well there that are specifically written for the window. So it's kind of an end-to-end solution. And we also provide a course. So the course includes the book as well, and also videos. So videos covering off SCS specific materials. So you don't have to go into each individual objective test theory and spend forever going through. We kind of take that pain out of it for you. So really, that's the main product that we sell, but we're looking at moving into MCS in the future.
Earlier this week, I recorded a podcast with another tuition provider, and they had their own take and perspective on the upcoming exam. So this is a chance for yet someone else to give their view, which I think is good for students, because you could ask a bunch of people the same question and they'll have variance in the responses and obviously different areas of focus. Could you maybe just give your perspective on what you see as the key areas of concern students may have when they read this pre-seen material?
Yeah, I think, when you're going through this particular strategic case study pre-seen, the main theme really is environmental concerns, ESG, sustainability. That's the big theme in this particular pre-seen. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's, other things, but in this particular case, it's all about sustainability really. And I suppose in terms of concerns the students may have, it's like every single case study round, the concerns are kind of the same. So, probably the most popular one that I get if I'm doing webinars with CIMA or for my own business are things like, how much should I write? How long should I study for this exam? So to give people, I suppose, some assurance going into their exam about how much they should write, how they should structure their answers and so on. I mean, I always say that when you're doing the case study exam, try to have, one paragraph for every 10% that's allocated to a question. It's probably the most common question that you see over and over is, how should I put together an answer? If you stick to that general rule, you'll probably fare pretty well. And I suppose people tend to ask the question kind of after that, how many words should a paragraph have? Or how long should...
That's what I was about to ask.
It's a good question, because a paragraph can be ginormous or it can be really small. So I generally recommend about 5 to 6 sentences, but it's always quality over quantity. So you can have a ginormous answer that will still fare pretty badly in the exam if you're not addressing the question that's been asked. So I just kind of wanted to get those out of the way first, because I get that question so often, and you see it online as well in different groups that students are in on LinkedIn. People are always asking, how long should my answers be? So I always say, let the question dictate how long the answer should be. And one paragraph, let's say 5 to 6 sentences long per 10%. So if you have one word 60%, you should probably have 6 paragraphs. I think that's kind of an easy way to remember it, isn't it? It's, pretty straightforward. So that's what I would do. In terms of the specific case study that we're talking about, Rhodomine, what are things that students should be looking at? Really, the main thing here is integrated reporting. I would say is probably the most testable topic. It's a topic that's tested a lot anyways. Things like risk reporting, so knowing the principal risk report and knowing the risk register, that's been tested a lot recently. Cyber risk is a big piece of this particular pre-seen. There's an article at the very end that kind of suggests that there may be a cyber attack, and students sometimes, when they see cyber risk, they think, wow, it's such a ginormous area within the syllabus. What could be tested even within that? And I suppose in the past, we've had questions around how we deal with cyber attacks. What are the effects on the share price? The governance, side of it. So what should the board be doing in relation to cyber risk? And in this particular company, we have no director that actually looks after technology. So that's a potential weakness there in the business. Things like corporate governance are always highly testable, such a big area, knowing what a non-executive director does, appointing executive directors, creating board committees, super popular questions, kind of round to round. And other things as well. So things like stakeholders, really highly testable for this particular pre-scene, and currency risk as well, because it's a business that trades overseas and has overseas subsidiaries. So I think those are pretty safe topics to be aware of.
I know you've talked about examinable areas. Those would be the main areas of focus for you, or?
I think so. I think if you look at the past papers, and let's say you look at the most recent set of papers that came out, those topics were tested on those papers. That doesn't mean that on your paper that you're going to be tested in the exact same way, but these are things that I suppose could come up in another fashion, I suppose. So if you take integrated reporting, for example, instead of having a question about how we could disclose a certain strategy or an action within the integrated report, you might have a question that says, why would it be challenging to disclose this? So maybe you might be tested from another perspective on integrated reporting. That tends to be the case in the SCS, where you have a question being tested one round and maybe an adaptation of that question being tested the next round. So I think on top of that, there's some other topics that, generally speaking, are highly testable. So share price movements, efficient market hypothesis, business valuations, dividend policy, internal audit. These are things that are kind of testable for all case studies, really, to be honest with you. So if you look at the past papers, you'll see internal audit's been tested at least once in every single window. So very safe bet there.
I think the themes, you hear mining, you hear lithium, it spells environmental disaster, exploitation. There's just been too many horror stories that you've heard in the past and you've read about, I'm sure, from some of these companies and some challenging, I guess, political countries, where there may be some instability in terms of regulation or corruption, etc. There could be concerns there. Final question is around what students should avoid doing in order to get the top marks.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think sometimes in life it's easier to remember the negatives, what you shouldn't do, than what you should do. And these really just come from my own experience and the examiner as well. So the examiner publishes a report for every window, and the reports are quite big. So, not every student's going to have the time to go through them. So I suppose I've done that for you. The number one thing really is avoid having preset answers. So going into the exam and basically just dumping an answer that you learned the night before or maybe the week before, hoping that you'll get some marks for that. It's kind of a bad strategy, to be honest with you. And this is something that the examiner has said over and over. Avoid learning by rote and then basically just putting that answer in irrespective of what's been asked. So sometimes students will do this with things like models, where they've learned off a model, they understand the model, and they want to use it really badly. So they just put it in the answer box, hoping to get marks. It's a bad strategy, to be honest with you. You're better off just looking at what's actually being examined and addressing it, even if it doesn't seem like it's something that's on syllabus. So sometimes when you're writing your answer, you may think, well, this is just common sense. This is something that I do in my day-to-day job, or this might be something in terms of professional judgment that I've done in the past. So maybe it's around restructuring or something like valuing a business. Depends on, what you work in. But often it's the case that the SCS answers that are really, really good are kind of common sense answers. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be super technical.
Yeah.
It is important to know your technical knowledge, but I think learning answers off beforehand is not a good strategy. Okay. So and that comes from the examiner. The other one is, as well, is kind of obsessing over maybe small things that don't get you marks. So having, a really long introduction, a really long conclusion, those things are not going to earn you marks, and you have a limited amount of time. So in the real world, if you were sending an email to a board member, of course, you would have a really nicely formatted email. You'd have a very clear introduction and so on. But really in this exam, you're not going to get marks for the introduction or the conclusion. So you have to scale those back. And actually, if you look at the official CIMA solutions, you'll see that they aren't even there at all. So you could be...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So you can actually do that if you wanted. I say to my students, a one-line introduction is sufficient. It's just to have some structure there, but that's about it, really. And I think the last thing to avoid is just having lots of small points. The examiner said that they like to see developed points. They like to see kind of a wider consideration of the issue rather than having, let's say, 20 bullet points of small issues. They want to see 5 well-developed paragraphs that consider the wider issues. They consider the scenario, the pre-scene, so on and so forth. So that would be my big tip to students.
Yeah, great. No, some good stuff there, Hugh, particularly around the formatting, because I have actually heard that before, where students have obsessed about structure, layout. You know, like they're writing an A level or leaving cert paper, for example, where you get marked presentation. It's not the case. Yeah, great to get that insight. And I know this is a short and snappy pod today, but obviously we're just trying to get as much insight as we can, just so it can benefit students who are gearing up for the November exam. There will be show note links to both Hugh and his organisation that'll come with the pod as well. So anyone would please need to reach out or ask any further questions. For more information on FLP, go to enrolled.cgma.org. Thanks again to Hugh, and thanks for listening, everyone. If you know a friend or colleague who could use this information, feel free to share it using your networks. You'll see the sharing buttons on the podcast app. That's it for now. We'll have another podcast probably in December. I have a number of options, so hopefully we'll do another one in December. Not about exams this time, but a much more generic subject. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.